there aren't big fish hooks that I think we should be concerned about. And where there are, there's a whole lot of flexibility in the law to adjust the rules if they're not quite working.
So some people might be dubious about some of these safeguards. For example, the restrictions on where you can and can't use cannabis. I mean, technically you can't drink alcohol in public either, right? But you wouldn't know that if you were on Courtney Place on a Saturday night.
Yes. So and we're starting strict. I have to say, it's a very, very conservative law. And it is starting strict. If you look at what we've had to do around tobacco and alcohol over the last few decades, it's to try to pull those markets in. But with cannabis, they're starting strict. So, no use in public. It's only, you can only use it in your private home or in a licensed premise. It's R20, not R18. Tobacco and alcohol are 18. No, cannabis is 20. No advertising whatsoever. The All Blacks won't be sponsored by cannabis. So, again, we're starting strict, and I think that's the right approach.
Hey, Ross.
Oh, yeah. Please.
How are we going to stop stoned people driving and killing people?
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem now, and whether the legal status is going to change that is up for debate. But one thing that's happening in parallel to this is that the government's looking at giving police new powers and new testing abilities. They are currently researching whether saliva testing that they have in Australia can be introduced in New Zealand. So that's one issue that should happen in parallel to this. And the other thing that the government needs to do is give really good information to employers and employees around workplace impairment as well.
Very good. Ross Bell from the Drug Foundation. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Cheers.
And we have just had some news to hand here. Australia, and this is regarding the proposed Trans-Tasman travel bubble. Australia and New Zealand are committed to introducing a Trans-Tasman COVID-safe travel zone as soon as it is safe to do so, according to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Prime Minister Scott Morrison. The Prime Ministers agreed to commence work on a Trans-Tasman COVID-safe travel zone, easing travel restrictions between Australia and New Zealand. Such an arrangement would be put in place once it's safe to do so and once necessary health, transport and other protocols have been developed and met to ensure the protection of public health. Catherine, I mean, your reaction to that, it's pretty much as we were expecting, right? There's no time frame, but it is an ambition that both countries are looking at introducing.
I quite like an indication of a time frame. Are we talking months? Are we talking next year? Are we talking what? I mean, it would be nice to know so that we could start planning and, tourism operators, etc., could get themselves geared up for it. Because there's obviously no point in us being able to go over there if the Air New Zealand flights aren't actually running, are there?
And we have actually had, in addition to this, there is no time frame reiterating that, but once effective travel arrangements across the Tasman are established, Prime Ministers Ardern and Morrison will look at opportunities to broaden that to the Pacific. Your thoughts on that, Mike?
I think it's great. As I said, it's a numbers game for us. As the small brother, we've got to be happy if we can expand our bubble, that's for sure.
Indeed. Great stuff. Hey, it's been wonderful having you both on today. Mike Rehu and Catherine Robertson, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
We will be back from 3:45 tomorrow. In the meantime, Checkpoint is up next. Thanks very much for listening and have a great evening.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, 2 days in a row, 0 new cases of COVID. So is a Trans-Tasman bubble really going to float? We'll have the latest from the Prime Minister's video call with her Aussie counterpart. We look at how our Alert Level 3 compares with COVID restrictions across the ditch. The Ministry of Education's pandemic response has been described as both shambolic and nimble. So which is it? And what will school look like under Level 2? No more automated responses to appeals to leave quarantine on compassionate grounds. And allegations of a neighbourhood feud, a stealth poisoning and the death of a beloved dog. And the Auckland bar owner who's fighting for the right to party.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. Australia and New Zealand have both committed to introducing a COVID-safe travel zone between the two countries. This comes after Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern joined Australia's National Cabinet meeting this afternoon. There is no time frame about when it might happen, with the two leaders saying in a statement it would happen as soon as it was safe to do so. Once effective travel arrangements across the Tasman are established, Australia and New Zealand will look at opportunities to broaden that to the Pacific. Education leaders have by turns damned and praised the Education Ministry's response to the pandemic today. Appearing before Parliament's Epidemic Response Committee, they also warned that they need to know the rules for opening at Alert Level 2. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The headmaster of Auckland Grammar School, Tim O'Connor, told the committee the ministry's treatment of secondary schools during the pandemic has lacked a strategy and been a shambles. But the Principals Federation said the ministry had been excellent and helped a national school system to successfully and repeatedly turn on a dime. Submitters said they needed to know as soon as possible the conditions for opening schools and early learning centres at Alert Level 2 so they knew how many children to allow back in class. Ko John Gerritsen, TNA.
For a second day in a row, there are no new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand. There are 4 people in hospital, but none are in intensive care, and there have been no further deaths. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says one case previously identified as probable has been found not to have the virus. Dr Bloomfield says having another day of 0 new cases is encouraging, but New Zealand must continue to stick to the plan. The Prime Minister says the response to appeals to break mandatory quarantine on compassionate grounds should not be automated. Speaking at the COVID-19 media briefing this afternoon, Jacinda Ardern was responding to questions about a High Court ruling allowing Auckland man Oliver Christiansen to leave quarantine to visit his dying father. The ruling said the Health Ministry's rejection of Mr Christiansen's request had the hallmarks of an automatic rejection. Ms Ardern says the point of appeals on compassionate grounds is that the circumstances can be assessed.
There should be nothing automated about that. We should give genuine consideration for each of those applications because they would only have been made because of dire circumstances.
Jacinda Ardern, the Ministry is now reviewing all appeals to break quarantine on compassionate grounds. There have been more than 2,600 approvals for interregional travel on compassionate grounds since the lockdown began. Of those, 1,768 were approved under Alert Level 4 and a further 895 under Level 3. 255 applications were denied. The National Crisis Management Centre is responsible for interregional travel. Exemptions include supporting a minor who needs urgent care, supporting a person in a critical or terminal condition, and the need to support a person with exceptional health or care needs. The Waitemata DHB is setting up bubbles to limit staff movements at hospitals dealing with COVID-19 patients. It comes amid an inquiry into how 3 nurses at Waitakere Hospital were able to contract the virus. 7 other cases are linked to the outbreak. The acting chief executive of the Waitemata District Health Board, Andrew Brandt, says the bubbles will mean staff working on COVID-19 wards won't work in other areas on subsequent days. He says around 400 staff have tested negative for COVID-19. The police have charged a third person with the brutal murder of Christchurch woman Angela Blackmore in August 1995. Last October, a man and a woman in their 40s were charged with murder over the 21-year-old's death in her Wainoni home almost 25 years ago. The man has since pleaded guilty to murder and is awaiting sentence. Detective Sergeant Todd Hamilton says a 47-year-old man is due to appear in Queenstown District Court tomorrow. Pest detection cameras on an island in the Hauraki Gulf have caught people breaching the Level 3 and 4 lockdown rules. The monitors were placed at Motukorea Browns Island to track pest activity after stoats were found there in mid-March. But since then, Auckland Councillor Richard Hills says they have picked up at least 6 people visiting the island.
And that's captured people there at 1:30 in the morning, a couple walking down the beach with a glass of wine in their hand, but they must be getting there by boat or kayak, travelling well over 1.5 kilometres from the coast at least.
Richard Hills says that's an obvious breach of the rules at levels 3 and 4. Maritime police say they will be stepping up their patrols of the area. It's nearly 5:05. In sport, the Wellington Phoenix want to know how much financial assistance the club will get to finish the A-League season. Football Federation Australia has committed to completing the current season, which was stopped in March. The competition is expected to restart in August, and Phoenix General Manager David Dome says the club still has questions it wants answered about the financial impact of returning to the field.
If we were going to hub the A-League, it's going to be a very expensive exercise, and then the flow on from that is how much is left to pay the clubs, which will have to cover players and staff and all our running costs, while essentially there's very little income coming through.
David Dome. And the former All Black loose forward Alan Sutherland has died in South Africa after a short battle with cancer. He was 76. Sutherland played 64 games for the All Blacks, including 10 tests between 1968 and 1973. And that's the news.
An open border with Australia is floated.
If the two countries continue to track the same when it comes to the virus, then I do believe that people will start to travel.
As long as we're seeing eye to eye.
Well, we have the same goal, absolutely. We don't think we can eradicate this disease, but we're going to keep it out at our borders, and we're going to find it quickly and stamp it out.
And we have the same rules.
It will hugely help if both Australia and New Zealand have the same definition of what elimination means.
New Horizons. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast taking us to midnight tomorrow Wednesday from Met Service. For Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula, showers, some heavy hail and possible thunderstorms. Clearing tomorrow morning. A period of strong and gusty southwesterlies tonight and overnight. Waitomo, Taumarunui, also Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers, some heavy with hail. Thunderstorms are possible about western areas. Showers clearing overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers at first, some heavy with hail. Turning to rain, possible thunderstorms and hail overnight. Then clearing later tomorrow morning or afternoon. Taranaki to Wellington, including Wairarapa, rain or showers, possibly heavy, thundery with hail, clearing early tomorrow morning. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, showers, some heavy with hail, possible thunderstorms about now. Mainly fine tomorrow, isolated evening showers in Bulla. For Westland and Northern Fiordland, mainly fine. Otago, Southland and Southern Fiordland, showers gradually easing, then becoming confined to the coast and Fiordland tomorrow. At the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail, becoming isolated tomorrow. 5:07.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to Checkpoint. Let's begin tonight with the latest on plans for a Trans-Tasman bubble. After a video meeting between Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison this morning, the two leaders say they are committed to introducing a Trans-Tasman COVID-safe travel zone as soon as it's safe to do so. Scott Morrison says a Trans-Tasman travel zone is still some time away, but he says the country is committed to introducing one. Speaking at his post-Cabinet press conference, Scott Morrison said when Australia is ready to start opening its borders, New Zealand is an obvious place to start.
The Prime Minister and I have been now for several weeks been talking about a safe travel zone between Australia and New Zealand. It is still some time away, but it is important to flag it because it is part of the road back. At some point, both Australia and New Zealand will start connecting with the rest of the world again. And the most obvious place for that to start is between Australia and New Zealand. And we could see that happening, but it's not something that's about to happen next week or anything like that. It is something that will better sit alongside when we're seeing Australians travel from Melbourne to Cairns at about that time. I would expect everything being equal that we'd be able to, fly from Melbourne to Auckland or to Christchurch or things like that.
Joining us now with more detail is our political editor, Jane Patterson. Hi, Jane. So they're committed to this, but what does that actually mean in practical terms?
Well, I think the commitment in itself is significant because, of course, there's been a lot of chat about the Trans-Tasman bubble over the last couple of weeks, raised initially by Winston Peters in an interview with an Australian media outlet. So here we are a couple of weeks on, now a firm commitment between the two countries. The main thing, though, is when is it going to happen? And as you've just heard from Scott Morrison, no detail in the statement that the two leaders released today about when that could happen. But I think if you look at New Zealand's situation first, we have still in level 2, potentially going into next week. We still actually don't know whether we'd be able to travel regionally, let alone further afield. And Mr Morrison just alluded to some of the states in Australia still having closed borders to each other. So I would take from that his comments that those borders would have to be open within mainland Australia itself before Trans-Tasman travel could happen.
So, as you say, no specific time frame here, just some vaguish indications. National has repeatedly asked for a commitment to be made to setting this up by the end of the year. Does that seem realistic, all things being equal, what we know?
Look, the signals from the Prime Minister were certainly that it would be in the medium term. So she has said this week and the end of last week it wouldn't be in the next couple of weeks. So that's not an option, and Mr Morrison just reiterated that. But I think further than that it could be possible, especially with both countries really seeming to get the infection rates under control. New Zealand, of course, recording a second day of 0 cases. So all of those indications are good. But basically they said that they would have to have necessary health, transport and other protocols developed and met, but they did say that they would need to be cautious, and as we've heard both leaders say, they would really be reluctant to start any kind of travel before they were sure that people could do that safely, and there would still have to be measures that people would have to take travelling in terms of the ability to contact trace and recording where you've been and that sort of thing. So a lot to sort out. But one interesting thing in this is that they have said in the statement that once effective travel arrangements have been set up between Australia and New Zealand, both countries would then look further afield to the Pacific. Now that's a region that has been got away with not too much infection. They've managed it well. There'd be again a real reluctance to open up travel if it was going to expose the Pacific countries in any way, but tourism's important to them as well. So between Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific, it could see quite a lot of tourism activity and business activity resumed even within that quite tight regional focus.
The Pacific, though, is a much riskier prospect, isn't it, Jane? If you look at what happened with the measles outbreak in Samoa last year, when you look at the health system there and the availability of things like respirators, exporting any COVID cases to them could be catastrophic.
Absolutely, and I think that's reflected in the statement. It says expand the concept to members of our broader Pacific family, and they say in the statement we will work with interested Pacific countries. So this is something Australia and New Zealand will not be wanting to be seen to impose on the Pacific. The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, though, has been talking about New Zealand's realm countries, in particular Niue and Rarotonga, as being within New Zealand's purview, so they could potentially offer better support, better health support, and that would have to be, I'm sure, part of any discussions or arrangements before travel started with those countries.
Jane, the other thing this statement says from the Prime Minister is that they're going to consult stakeholders and business leaders. So who do we think is going to get a say in all of this?
Well, of course, we have tourism operators around the country very, very concerned about the livelihoods and especially once that wage subsidy ends in about 4 weeks. The ski season is one that's been talked about. Can this start up in time to get the ski season going? So tourism operators would be one, Air New Zealand, the transport operators would be another. Now, of course, Air New Zealand and other airlines have been flying Mercy flights. They continue to operate. So part of the plan would be to talk to Air New Zealand or talk to Australian airlines to see exactly how they could do this. We've had reports of domestic flights where there haven't necessarily been great social distancing and everything hasn't probably been as good as the government may have wanted. So in that case, that would be a huge part of it, to make sure that the actual transport part was safe and that everything was in place for that to be able to be done without risk of spreading the virus.
Thanks for the update, Jane. That is our political editor, Jane Patterson, joining us there from Parliament. That is the Prime Minister's Australian and our own Jacinda Ardern are committed, they say, to moving to safe travel zones. In essence, a Trans-Tasman bubble as soon as they are able to. Education leaders have today variously described the Education Ministry's response to the pandemic as a shambles, a game of Russian roulette, as well as nimble and responsive. They warned Parliament's Epidemic Response Committee that some students' education is suffering under the lockdown. And they say schools and early learning centres need to know as soon as possible what the rules will be for Alert Level 2. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The headmaster of Auckland Grammar School, Tim O'Connor, told the committee the government's treatment of secondary schools during the pandemic has been a shambles. He said they should have been told in advance about changes to alert levels, should never have been given high alcohol hand sanitizer, and should have been allowed to decide for themselves which students can return to class under alert level 3.
Not only has there been no visible strategy communicated to secondary principals, there has been no position of advocacy for secondary education, other than perhaps the squawks of frustrated principals who've had the courage to speak up. Then we get reactions. To be frank, colloquially, it's been a shambles.
He says the lack of education strategy has harmed the education of many students.
It will have done some damage now. However, if this continues, the damage will be irreparable. We will not be able to get students to the level that they need to be. If we don't get Year 12 and 13 students back on campus within a week, we're in trouble.
The president of the Principals Federation, Perry Rush, also told the committee some students are suffering because they're not attending regular classes. He said children who need extra support for learning or live in dysfunctional homes are vulnerable.
Continuing to maintain a significant portion of our school roll outside in remote settings has the potential to continue to place those children at some risk. And so this question of what the next step looks like is very critical and it's somewhat worrying.
But Perry Rush had high praise for the Education Ministry.
It's widely accepted in principalship that the Ministry has been nimble and responsive in their communication. We're very conscious that a national system of education, a national schooling system that's been asked to turn on the dime several times now has done so at pace and with incredible complexity.
The Chief Executive of the Early Childhood Council, Peter Reynolds, was more critical. He said early learning centres should not have partially reopened at level 3 and the Health and Education Ministries have not provided enough proof that it's safe.
We understand that pragmatically the risk is low in New Zealand right now. The numbers are looking increasingly good, but too much is being done on trust and inconclusive evidence. We need to stop playing Russian roulette with our children. We want the risk of carrier transmission to be discussed openly. We can't understand it and we can't ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist.
Responding to the criticism at the committee hearing, the Secretary for Education, Iona Holstead, later told RNZ she's proud of how ministry staff have responded to a rapidly changing situation. She says the level of guidance and direction education leaders want from the ministry varies and they will not all agree with the ministry's decisions. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Glenn Denham is the principal of Massey High School in West Auckland and he joins me now. Good evening, Glenn. So,
Kia ora.
A range of characterisations there. Shambles, Russian roulette. On the other hand, some people say the Ministry of Education's been nimble. Well, how would you characterise the leadership you've seen from the ministry?
I think it's been chaotic. I think it's been unclear. I think that what we're after is trust. Trust me that I know exactly which kids to bring back to my school, our 12s and 13s. Because I tell you this, it's like dog years. Every week that we lose at Massey, we're a low decile school, our community don't have a lot of money. It's like I lose 7 weeks of learning. And our kids have worked hard to get into year 12 and 13. They've worked their socks off, and many of them are disengaged. We don't have the devices. We asked for 491, we've got 83, and I don't know who's got them. That's been shambolic. And I'm absolutely okay to wait for Māngere College, other colleges that are lower decile, then we'll wait our turn. But when I hear that higher decile schools, 9 and 10, have got 100, 200 computers, then I'm livid about that because actually, people got to wait in line. But we've got kids at home that are not learning. They're not engaging. Some kids have got jobs. Some kids won't return to school because mum's lost their job, and I understand that they've got to do some work. But we need our kids back. And if anyone says to you that actually this is the way of the future, Lord help us, please not let that be true, because nothing will replace kanohi to kanohi, eye to eye with a teacher. All our staff can't come back in, that's okay. You stay at home. And I think our teaching staff have done a brilliant job, but we need our most vulnerable kids, our 12s and 13s. They've got months left at school. They're anxious about exams. They're anxious about NCA. They want to come back in. And unless I know the ones, I've got lists on my desk at school that says which kids we can bring them in safely. We'll adhere to all the social distancing, and we'll do it in a safe way. But let us have the power to do it. Let us bring them in.
Glenn, do you think you've actually lost some of those kids who, as you say, are in the final months of their school education, that they won't get their NCA as a result of this? Too hard basket gone now from the system.
Yeah, I think so. Without a doubt, we've lost some. We've lost some, but this is crucial. We are entering. If it goes another week or two, you can hear the anxiety in my voice and the passion in my voice because we love our kids. But I know what their future is, and I refuse to our kids to be unemployed. I refuse look, listen, COVID-19 has taken the lives of our people. We can't let COVID-19 take our kids' education. We can do it in a safe way, but let every school decide. We're different from other schools. Let every school decide. If they think, well, we can all do it at distance, then more power to you. Some schools are about to bring 3 cohorts with the kids back in and do it safely. Let us decide. We're the experts in the field, and we'll make sure that we keep our staff and our kids safe. But we must have the opportunity. This is almost breaking point right now. If this goes on and we can't bring our 12s and 13s back for another week or two, then I lament. Then I'll have lost every week. We're going to lose more and more and more kids. Because when they get back, we've got to hit the ground running. And our teachers are working their socks off, but they're working with those kids that can access online learning. When I've got, almost 40% of our kids have not got access to devices, we've got to reach into their homes, and we've got to get those kids back to school. And not only that, but I agree with that. We've got 3 generations of families living under one roof with 3 bedrooms. Some of those kids need to come back to school just to take the weight out of their households. But
so,
please
Glenn,
don't dictate to us.
Sorry to interrupt.
Please let us have that decision.
Do you have any idea of the number of students that you think won't come back?
Off the top of my head right now, because we're in week 2 of term 2, at Massey we've probably lost about a dozen. And I know it sounds like a small figure because they've either gone up north or they've got employment. That number will multiply as the weeks go on because kids are saying, well, we're not going back to school. I need to get a job because I'm not going to get my NCA level 2, level 3. I'm not going to get UE. So I think, the announcement that the Prime Minister will make on Thursday and subsequently on Monday, they're big announcements for us as education, And I'd love to see, we've got great people, Deirdre O'Shea from Onehunga, who's the Spans, is a brilliant principal. We must listen to her. We've got secondary heads out there that can advise the ministry about how we can do this really, really safely. So I'm looking for clarity and I'm looking for guidance.
Have you been consulted about what level 2 will look like at your school?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So what do you think of that?
It's just I'm waiting for when our owner sends out. There's been a lot of communication from the ministry, but you've got to wade through the primary, early years and that to find out what it means for secondary. It's not clear. And so, we had a meeting with Deirdre, with some other principals today, and Deirdre told us what she is. She's at the end of the phone, but, we should be consulted. Other people should, there should be clusters of secondary schools that have been directly consulted as small groups, and getting their feedback. But I tell you now, we're at a critical stage, for many kids in New Zealand, it's unemployment. And I'm speaking on behalf of my brothers and sisters that are principals and teachers here. We refuse to let that happen to our kids. We cannot let COVID-19 take the education of our kids. So let us do it safely. Let us plan and let us do it, but give us a little bit of time to get some plans in place, and then let us bring those kids back in that really need to be in there, need to get in front of a computer, need to get in front of a teacher so we can secure their futures.
How fast can you gear up? What kind of warning do you need to go to level 2 and get your kids back?
I would love someone to tell me already. I need that time. We've got, there will be operational thing, but if we have to work, the Prime Minister said, listen, we're all back, kids are back in on Monday, you can have this Tuesday. We'll just work over the weekend as a leadership team to get that done. I know lots of schools will do that to make sure that the right kids are contacted and we've brought them back in. I think it'll take a few days. We'll have to communicate with them directly, and then that'll go on so we can gather in these kids. Our attendance at level year 13 was 91.6%. Now I think it's less than 60% in terms of those that are engaging with lessons, and that's a worry. So, the sooner the better. We're just, we're looking for we can't afford level 2 to be grey. We can't afford it to. We need it to be black and white. You've got the control. You bring it in. We will monitor it. We will be sending people out to make sure that social distancing is adhered to and all of that kind of thing. But trust us that we have the best interests of our staff and our kids and our community. Because the biggest threat to New Zealand is poverty. And, we see it at our school, our decile schools, and we've worked too hard to bring our kids and our families out of poverty. And this is and I refuse for our kids to be mired in that for years to come. We cannot do that.
Glenn, really appreciate your time this evening. That is Glenn Denham, who is the Massey High School principal. It is 25 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that. Should kids be going back to school? These are the kids who are in their NCEA years there. Glenn was saying, well, he's going to lose some of them. Some of them just won't come back. They've had so many weeks without proper education. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Prime Minister says the response to appeals to break mandatory quarantine on compassionate grounds should not be an automated one. Speaking at the COVID-19 media briefing today, Jacinda Ardern was responding to questions about a High Court ruling allowing Oliver Christiansen to leave quarantine in Auckland to visit his dying father. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
Oliver Christiansen arrived in New Zealand on April the 23rd after leaving the UK to be at his dying father, Anthony's bedside. At the time, Mr Christiansen thought he'd have enough time to sit out the quarantine period for people arriving from overseas. But his father's condition deteriorated. After 3 unsuccessful appeals on compassionate grounds, the family sought a review in the High Court. In her decision, Justice Walker said the handling of Mr Christiansen's case had the hallmarks of an automatic rejection. Today, the Prime Minister said each appeal needed to be treated on its merits.
The whole point of having the ability to apply for a compassionate exemption was so that we could assess the circumstances. There should be nothing automated about that. We should give genuine consideration for each of those applications because they would only have been made because of dire circumstances.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, has announced a review of all appeals asking to break quarantine on compassionate grounds. RNZ understands there have been 24 appeals to break quarantine because a close relative is dying and a further 50 for other reasons. All of them have been rejected. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said 18 requests had been granted, but in an embarrassing U-turn, she has had to correct that after the Ministry of Health put its hand up for providing her with confusing figures. Today, Ms Ardern said it has to be remembered why quarantine restrictions were there in the first place.
These are devastating cases, but the incredibly difficult judgment the Ministry of Health are making is that, from memory, we've had over 20 cases of people who have been in isolation, having come in from overseas, who have subsequently tested positive for COVID. So that is the really difficult position that those making those judgments are in.
Australian lawyer Greg Barnes represented 2 New Zealand citizens who travelled to Auckland with the hope of visiting their dying mother, only to have their appeal to leave quarantine on compassionate grounds rejected. The sisters were in agony over the decision.
So we could stay away from her, we could use PPE gear to visit her in hospital. We had options, and we fully understand the reasons for the lockdown, but in these few cases they surely can give a compassionate leave because we may never see our mother again.
Mr Barnes says lawmaking at times of crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, is a problem.
Public health officials have and ministers have enormous power to make laws effectively on the run because they have to. And one of the issues that we've been looking at in Australia, and it's obviously been an issue in this case in New Zealand, is whether or not those laws and the enforcement of those laws are simply unreasonable in some circumstances.
Mr Barnes says Australians faced with similar circumstances will be taking a close interest in the decision here.
That is where you've got family members who are gravely ill at death's door and where people have been denied the possibility of visiting those relatives because they're in enforced social isolation. This decision will certainly be looked at closely because the law in Australia and New Zealand is very similar.
Oliver Christiansen is meanwhile back at his Auckland hotel, sitting out the last 2 days of his quarantine period after spending about 36 hours with his father. Mr Christiansen told RNZ the focus should now turn to the other families who've been refused permission to see their loved ones. The story, he says, is no longer about a son and his wish to see his dying dad, but about the process that prevented that in the first place. It's now up to others to keep asking questions while he steps back and concentrates on rebuilding as a family. Mo te hōtaka o te ata nei, ko Robin Martin aho.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, predictions that 134,000 Americans will die from COVID-19. Two Auckland greengrocers say they could have provided a safer environment than a supermarket, and Christchurch police investigate the deaths of two family pets poisoned. We'd love your feedback. What do you think about a Trans-Tasman bubble? Would you be comfortable travelling back and forth to Australia without a quarantine period? And what do you reckon that school should look like at alert level 2? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Facebook is Checkpoint, or a good old-fashioned email. We love those, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says Trans-Tasman travel could restart when domestic travel is allowed again in Australia. A COVID-safe travel zone was mooted after a meeting of Australia's National Cabinet, which was joined by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern this afternoon. The two leaders say the zone will be set up once it's safe to do so. For a second day in a row, there are no new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand, and one probable case has been classed as negative. Of the 4 people in hospital, none are in intensive care, and there have been no more deaths. School leaders have told Parliament's Epidemic Response Committee they urgently need to know the rules for Level 2. They say they cannot plan until they know how many children will be allowed back into schools and early learning centres. The Prime Minister says there will be no automatic response to appeals to break quarantine on compassionate grounds. Jacinda Ardern was referring to a High Court ruling which said the Health Ministry's rejection of a man's request to visit his dying father had hallmarks of an automatic rejection. But Ms Ardern says the point of such appeals is that the circumstances can be assessed. The National Crisis Management Centre has granted more than 2,600 applications for travel between regions on compassionate grounds since the lockdown began. 255 applications were denied. The Waitemata DHB is setting up bubbles to prevent staff moving between wards amid an inquiry into how 3 Waitakere hospital nurses were able to contract COVID-19. 7 other cases are linked to the DHB outbreak. And a third person has been charged with the 1995 murder of Christchurch woman Angela Blackmore. Last October, a man and a woman in their 40s were charged with murder over the 21-year-old's death in her Wainoni home almost 25 years ago. The man has since pleaded guilty to murder and is awaiting sentence, and a 47-year-old man is due to appear in Queenstown District Court tomorrow. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to the business news now with Emma Hatton. Emma, investors in the Ross Asset Management claim reckon they're one step closer to taking the ANZ Bank to court.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, so this decision from the High Court was issued just after 5 this evening. So it's pretty fresh across the desk, and what it says is that ANZ's bid to have a claim against it related to the David Ross saga, have the claim struck out, has been declined. So the court has declined to strike out their claim. And I'll just recap and give a bit of background. So in early March, ANZ was in the High Court arguing that a claim that was being brought against it should be struck out because it was vague, basically, and it would be likely to fail in court. Now, that claim, which was brought by a group of more than 550 investors, former clients of David Ross, the Wellington financial advisor, they claimed that the bank either knew or should have known that he was operating a Ponzi scheme because ANZ was the bank where the accounts were kept. Of course, that scheme collapsed quite famously, and the losses totaled about $115 million. So ANZ applied to strike out that claim. It said none of the claims were reasonably arguable. It also said that any claims for losses suffered before the 1st of June 2010 had been brought too late and could not be claimed. The collapse, of course, happened in 2012. So the mandate is, if you will, is that the court can only strike out the claim if it's so untenable that it cannot succeed. So obviously the court does not see the claim as untenable, so it's declined to strike it out. So, from here, there's a couple of options. ANZ can appeal that decision And if they don't appeal, the claimants can move forward. So certainly one to watch.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to new vehicles. Well, they're not racing off the lots. So what do we know about the numbers for April?
Yeah, so those numbers for April are pretty abysmal, but, I mean, not surprising, of course. April last year, there were 10,600 new vehicle registrations. April this year, 1,039, so down 90%. It's $450 million less revenue. And the important thing to remember, of course, is that these car retailers, these car lot owners, they're independent businesses, local owners, and this business is very capital heavy, you know, importing these cars, having the space for them and all of that. So the revenue is really important and they need it. Also, what's been happening is there's been this bottleneck of vehicles coming in because these orders and these ships that were chartered to bring them in, they were already on their way. They were already coming, lockdown or not. So there's this bottleneck of new vehicles which have arrived that has slowed now due to, you know, at the end of April. But there's sort of an abundance of these vehicles. So what it means, now that these dealers can trade a little bit more freely, there may be some deals coming. There may be some deals coming for us as a way for them to free up cash flow and move some of that stock along. But really, these businesses, they can't afford to knock off too much of the price because they really need that revenue. And according to the Motor Industry Association, which is where this data came from, the industry as a whole is looking at 40% less sales for 2020 compared to 2019. So that's huge. And it's actually calling on the government to do some practical sort of stimulus that will help that industry stay on its feet. So they're saying that the government should fast-track its plan to electrify their own fleet, saying, you know, that would be a practical way to get some cash into the sector and move forward something that they've said they want to do anyway. And they also say now would be a really good time for the government to establish some sort of financial incentive scheme for people to scrap their old cars, so ones that don't meet modern safety ratings and are high polluters, sort of the old dungers. So put in some sort of scheme there for people to get rid of those cars and buy up some new ones and keep that industry ticking over. So again, one to watch and see what happens there.
Let's take a quick spin around the markets. What are the numbers today?
Yes, so the NZX Top 50 Index has closed up just ever so slightly at 10,491 points, so that's up about 0.14%. The New Zealand dollar tracking at around 0.61 US, 0.94 Australian, and it sits around 0.48 to the British pound.
Thanks, Emma. Emma Hatton with our business news today. New Zealand has been at alert level 3 for a week now, and with more businesses operating, it's brought some relief to the economy. With the number of new cases of COVID-19 staying at single digits for several days and then 0 for the last 2 days, there's been questions over whether the move to level 3 could have been made sooner. Could New Zealand have eased restrictions and been more like Australia, which has also managed to significantly flatten its curve in the same time? Indira Stewart has this report.
Sepali's floral studio in Auckland's Mangere Bridge has been busier than ever this past week.
People were asking me for flowers when we were in level 4. And, of course we couldn't do that. But, so I was expecting that. I was expecting a busy first week back.
Sepali says being a small operation at level 3 means the safety guidelines haven't been too difficult to put in place. And she says she could have operated just as safely during the lockdown. But even if she'd been allowed to, she doesn't think it would have been financially viable.
The problem is the supply of product and willingness of people to come and purchase from you. I think that would have been the problem. I wouldn't have had the same amount of sales to have the shop open, to take that risk. I don't think I would have been able to get couriers to deliver. So I actually don't think we could have done it at level 4.
Both Australia and New Zealand have managed to flatten their curves in almost the same amount of time. Yesterday, Australia marked 100 days since its first confirmed case of coronavirus, with just 27 new cases across the country. While today, New Zealand announced no new cases for its second day in a row. But Australia's restrictions haven't been as tight as New Zealand's, prompting questions as to whether our government could have eased restrictions sooner, lessening the forecasted impact on the economy. While some have looked across the ditch with envy, Dr. Alan Cheng, who is the Professor of Infectious Diseases Epidemiology at Victoria's Monash University, argues things aren't as different between the two countries as people think.
Look, I think it's actually been a lot more similar than people say. I think New Zealand probably locked down slightly earlier and slightly harder than we have, but I think, Australia and New Zealand have probably taken a fairly similar approach.
So how similar have the approaches been over the past 6 weeks? The rules across Australia's territories and states are fairly similar, with some minor differences. Generally, people could still go to work if they weren't able to do so from home. They could still get haircuts, and they could also use babysitting services if they needed to. Retail shops have been allowed to stay open with a 4 square metre rule. That means no more than one person for every 4 square metres of available floor space is allowed inside a shop. Queensland and the Northern Territory have opened playgrounds to the public for the first time in weeks. In Queensland, you could have up to 2 visitors in your own home. In New South Wales, you could meet up with one friend at a public place, but you must stay 1.5 metres away from each other. Bars and restaurants have been allowed to stay open to provide takeaway services, and the country's mining and construction industries have continued to operate. Dr. Cheng says while allowing more businesses to stay open sounds good in theory, in practice, the reality has been markedly different.
There's never been a sort of an absolute dictum that you can't open a shop, but that, you can only sort of allow a certain number of people into a shop, and then that just makes it not financially viable. A lot of businesses have pretty thin margins, so any restriction would make it very difficult for them. But in terms of the exact sort of what it actually translates to on the ground is often a little bit different to what the policy is.
Wellington-based economist Elizabeth Kendall has spent many years forecasting and modelling at the Reserve Bank in Australia and New Zealand, and she's been watching consumer reaction closely across both countries.
Even though Australia's lockdown has not been so strict, the behavioural response of people in the face of this outbreak is that they have really responded by staying home and not spending. And so activity has been reduced in places even where it was permitted. And so we've actually seen a reduction in activity in Australia that is more similar to New Zealand than you might expect.
Ms. Kendall says she believes New Zealand made the right call going into a strict lockdown, and for a very different reason. Dr. Brian Cox, an epidemiologist at Otago University, agrees. He says without the lockdown, New Zealand wasn't prepared for an outbreak.
Australia was very good at contact tracing. We weren't. We had planning for a flu pandemic, but this isn't flu. This is a cluster-based epidemic, which is a completely different beast, and you have to have a different way of tackling it. And that involves early diagnosis, contact tracing, contact them quickly and isolating them. We didn't have any plan for that approach at all. And we had to go into a lockdown to cope with the fact that our contact tracing wasn't as good as it should be.
Ms. Kendall says the trade-off of being more cautious, going hard and going early was worth it.
Overseas, we've seen that the consequences of going too slow and being too loose in restrictions has sort of devastating consequences. I think we made the right call. Maybe at the margin we could have been a little bit looser in our restrictions, but ultimately we've saved a whole lot of lives, and I think that's a great success.
For Checkpoint, Indira Stewart.
2 family-owned Auckland fruit shops are criticising lockdown rules as confusing. Long-standing businesses Jack Lum in Remuera and Casey Lou Fruit Centre in Mount Eden initially believed they could open during level 4 restrictions, but were ultimately forced to close. Both greengrocers believe they could have offered safer retail spaces than the country's big supermarkets during lockdown. Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe paid them a visit.
May marks Jack Lum's 50th year in business, but right now there's not a lot to celebrate. His shelves, once stocked full of fresh fruit and vegetables, sit bare.
So just go with it, because there's nothing you can do. What do? You just do as you're told. I think that's the best thing to do. There's no point arguing, because you're not going to win anyway.
Lum initially believed he could open for business under level 4 restrictions, but 2 days into the lockdown, police officers showed up for what they called a routine check. Then, 2 days later, another visit.
A couple of days later, a senior officer came in the shop and he wants to have a look at the papers. So we haven't got any papers that allow us to open. But we did register with MPI, but we haven't got it yet. I said to him, can we trade out today? He said, no, you have to close right away.
The officer remained at the greengrocer until a truckload of fresh produce was shifted off-site.
But at that time, a truck came back from the market with virtually a full load of goods for getting ready for the weekend trade. So it was almost half loaded anyway. He was almost half loaded, and we had to load that back on the truck. And he sort of waited there until we were more fully loaded before he drove away.
Lum had planned on staying open until the first Sunday of Level 4 restrictions before closing voluntarily because staff wanted to keep within their family bubbles. Lum believed he should have been given the okay to stay open for that first week of Level 4.
Yeah, you can still operate, but still keep to the 2 metre distancing and just let 2 or 3 people in at any one time. Because a lot of the shoppers that go to the supermarket would come here and buy their fruit and veggies anyway, so it's the same people.
And as it turned out, MPI actually felt it was okay too. A week after the police shutdown, Lum says the department gave him the green light to open. By that stage though, his shop was shut. Some extra stock had gone to a hostel for boys while the rest was sold to fruit shops allowed to stay open. A 10-minute drive across town, Frances Liu says she found the lockdown rules just as puzzling. At Level 3, Casey Liu Fruit Centre, which at 70 years is Mount Eden's oldest business, is livelier than Jack Lum's. Frances Liu's 87-year-old mother, Eileen, is determined to keep working, but to keep her safe, her daughters shift her to the shop office when we arrive. Mount Eden locals drop in to collect fresh produce, while the business is also supplying essential services and making contactless deliveries. But at the start of the lockdown, the shop initially believed it could open the same way a supermarket could, based on information from MBIE's website.
Every indication was that we could operate until we heard the interview with the deputy head of MBIE on the Wednesday morning just prior to the lockdown. And at that stage we thought, no, the retail has to close.
While supportive of the lockdown, Liu says multiple lessons must be taken from it.
We need to take the learnings from this to do it better. And certainly the clarity of information, the speed of response, and I think just the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing, where there have been conflicting responses or certainly leaving things open to interpretation. Those sorts of things do need to be tightened.
The greengrocer's turnover is down about 60%, but Liu believes it is better off than many other small businesses.
We're very lucky that this is a well-established business and it doesn't have any debt, so we've committed to paying our staff 100% of their earnings for the 12-week period. That's been subsidised by the wage subsidy, but that doesn't fully cover it.
While the 12-week wage subsidy appears generous, Liu points out many businesses experienced a drop-off before the lockdown and will take some time to recover once it's lifted. Liu maintains small businesses could have provided safe retail services during lockdown.
People do try to physically distance in the supermarket, but the narrowness of the aisles or just someone thinking they can quickly sort of sneak past and grab a particular item. If I'm honest, I actually do think that the small shopkeepers can provide a very safe, secure shopping environment.
Epsom MP David Seymour called Jack Lum's and Casey Liu institutions in his electorate.
People cannot understand why they've been put in this illogical position that they have to drive to a supermarket shared with 50 other people while their beloved local fruit store goes out of business.
Back in Remuera, 76-year-old Jack Lum's future remains uncertain. He has thought about closing for good, but says he may now open at Level 2.
We'll see what Level 2 is going to be like. I know there will be still some restrictions, but it'll probably be a lot better than Level 3. But the way I was been looking when they went to Level 3, and some people are not obeying the rules and having parties and going stupid, might be extended to go back to Level 4. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Just going to wait for her announcement and see what it is.
While the country prepares to move out of level 3, Lum's fruit shop remains well and truly locked down for now. For Checkpoint, Nick Trowbridge.
And if you were listening to that on radio, the video story will go up online, so do check it out. It is 11 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Waitemata District Health Board is creating work bubbles to limit staff movements at hospitals dealing with COVID-19 patients. It comes amid a probe into how 3 nurses at Waitakere Hospital were able to contract the virus despite wearing PPE gear. 7 other cases are linked to the outbreak, but the government maintains moving nurses between wards is standard practice. Mackenzie Smith reports.
At the weekend, the 4 northern DHBs rallied to support Waitakere Hospital staffing arrangements after 3 nurses contracted COVID-19. It was safe, they said, for staff to be rostered on COVID-19 and non-COVID wards as long as it wasn't on the same day and infection control protocols were followed. But the acting chief executive of the Waitemata DHB, Andrew Brandt, says that's now changed.
I think it is in response to the clinical situation we have at the moment and in response to staffing concerns and concerns over the last week. So that's why we have moved to endeavour to do the bubble.
The bubble will change staff rostering at the DHB's hospitals dealing with COVID-19 patients, so they won't work in other areas on subsequent days. Right now, that only applies to North Shore Hospital. But the move appears at odds with the Ministry of Health's insistence that staff can work between wards on different days. At today's media briefing, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the last few weeks have been a learning experience and a review into the outbreak would come ahead of any changes.
It includes senior people from within the District Health Board as well as an independent person from the Director of Nursing from Waikato DHB, and we're as interested in this and I think all DHBs are interested. What can we learn? How do we strengthen our protocols and make sure that we are reducing the risk to our frontline health workers?
Experts are calling for the bubble measures at Waitemata DHB to be extended across the country. A professional nursing advisor with the Nurses Organisation, Kate Weston, says the group was telling the government weeks ago that nurses at one DHB were scared about moving around hospitals, but they were told they had to continue.
The nurses concerned were extremely distressed, which is why many of them did actually contact NZNO. And I think, it is definitely now being looked at. There is a review. The practices have changed. But unfortunately, some damage has already been done and some people have been very distressed by the situation they found themselves in.
A professor of nursing at Massey University, Jenny Carrier, says it's probably 100% safer to have nurses not moving between wards.
Hospitals are notoriously struggling with inadequate levels of nursing staff, and so they therefore have developed habits of moving nurses around to fill gaps. In an ideal situation, that would not happen.
Meanwhile, all staff at the northern DHBs are being offered COVID-19 tests. Around 400 staff at the Waitemata DHB have been tested and all have come back negative. The review into the Waitakere Hospital cases is due within a week. For Checkpoint, Mackenzie Smith.
Leaked Ministry of Social Development documents show the agency is planning for hundreds of thousands of extra people to apply for benefits as COVID-19 creates a tidal wave of unemployment. RNZ's Guyon Espiner has received documents and emails outlining MSD plans to deal with the increase. He joins us now. Kia ora, Guyon. What do the documents tell us?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, these documents show the Ministry really preparing for a wave of unemployment. An extra 300,000 benefit applications is what these documents say they are preparing for. One of these documents outlines the agency's approach to managing this increased demand, and it's the key document, really. The key quote is, MSD is preparing for an increase of approximately 300,000 applications for benefits. This is primarily due to job loss from COVID-19. COVID-19. That is a quote from one of these documents. There's another one here showing a chart with a big spike in benefit applications from late March 22 in fact, and it examines how MSD can process these increased demand for applications for benefits. How can we meet increased demand for job seeker benefits to ensure our clients get paid quickly and without a negative customer experience, it asks. Now, we had a response from MSD, the Deputy Chief Executive, Viv Rickard, is saying that the Ministry's central planning scenario is in line with those Treasury forecasts which came out a couple of weeks ago. Now, that would see an increase in main benefit levels of about 200,000 by January of 2021. Now, they do say that increases of up to 288,000 would be possible under one of the more scenarios in that, one of the more severe scenarios in that Treasury paper, but they say, quote, this is not what we are currently planning for. But regardless of the final number, we can expect hundreds of thousands of new applications for benefits.
Yeah, so just doing a rough calculation in my head there, currently at about 4% unemployment, which is around 111,000 people. So if they're expecting up to an extra 300,000, we're talking, unemployment of about 16%. That is a massive rush to deal with, isn't it?
Well, that would be. And, look, these forecasts are being flung around at the moment. You'll remember these numbers. Treasury had a scenario released in mid-April saying, look, you could keep unemployment under 10, returning to 5% next year with a lot of government and a lot of fiscal support being pumped in. Without that, Treasury has said, between 13 as high as 26. And that's above 600,000 unemployed. Grant Robertson, the finance minister, said, you'll remember this at the time, that was unacceptable and that was only going to be under extended periods of alert level 4, and the government is going to be, throwing the kitchen sink at making sure that doesn't happen. But, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of applications for benefits, and many of these people will not have been on benefits for, before, and MSD is thinking, how can we actually process this? And one source I spoke to today described it as being paralysed, that, how were they going to actually manage to process these number of new claims?
Appreciate you joining us. That is Guyon Espinen there, who has documents and emails outlining MSD's plans to deal with an increase to beneficiaries, a tidal wave actually. Some of those figures showing perhaps several 100,000 extra people going on to the benefit. Let's get to some of your feedback now. On our earlier interview with Glenn Denham from Massey High School, he's the principal there. This person says, really impressed with Glenn on Checkpoint. Amazing person in college sector who advocates for senior students and, more importantly, to see that in low decile catchment. That is from Roger. Thanks for getting in touch, Roger. Glenn was saying that he fears that some of his students will completely drop off the radar, some of his senior students who, after several weeks of trying to educate at home, will simply not return. This person says, I'm in senior management team of a provincial high school and led my Decile 5 school into lockdown. What followed from the Ministry of Education was a shambolic series of demands from MOE to provide information which changed daily for students who had already left school. After 4 days of intense information gathering for MOE, we were told to provide our students with our own devices, a process we could have achieved in a query of the time without MOE intervention. Please just butt out MOE and let us organise the return of our students from our community. We know our premises, we know our whānau, and we know our students. Your help has been a hindrance. And this person says the principal at Massey High is talking total sense. Even with devices at home, many younger students in this West Auckland area are not engaging at home, to the concern of their teachers, with provided devices delivering the online learning programs. Communication generally sent to teachers to be easy on students as they may not have support at home. But some schools in West Auckland are embracing online learning as the new way. Bored primary age students are ultimately going to be swinging the changes themselves by coming back to school after the time at home in overcrowded conditions. And another person says the Massey High School principal is dead right. I'm a former educator. The schools must be empowered to make informed decisions that rescue kids who are at risk because they have the bad luck to come from crowded, under-resourced homes. This is an equity issue. I thought that this was part of the government's mission, says Ray. Another person says secondary school principal is right. I've got 3 kids, one in primary school, one in intermediate school and one in secondary school. Without doubt, it is my secondary school child who is feeling real pressure and needing to get back to school so she can engage face-to-face with teachers and continue with NCEA. This is in the context of decile 10 schools and a family that is lucky enough to be well-resourced. It would be desperately necessary for those senior secondary school kids who don't have support at home to get back to school.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. Australia and New Zealand have both committed to introducing a COVID-safe travel zone between the two countries. This comes after Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern joined Australia's National Cabinet meeting this afternoon. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The two leaders have issued a joint statement saying Australia and New Zealand would start working on the necessary health, transport and other protocols to make the Trans-Tasman bubble a reality. There's no time frame, with Scott Morrison and Ms Ardern only saying it would happen as soon as it was safe to do so. Any arrangement would also have to take into account state and territory movement restrictions in Australia. Once effective travel arrangements across the Tasman are established, they'd then look at whether that could be extended to interested Pacific countries. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Education leaders have warned MPs they need to know as soon as possible the rules for reopening classrooms at Alert Level 2. School principals and the Early Childhood Council told Parliament's Epidemic Response Committee today they need to know the number of children allowed in each room so they can timetable lessons and allocate teachers. The principal of Massey High School in West Auckland, Glenn Denham, has told Checkpoint the Education Ministry had been unclear over Level 2 rules.
I think it's been chaotic. I think it's been unclear. What we're after is trust. Trust me that I know exactly which kids to bring back to my school.
Principal Glenn Denham. The Waitemata DHB is creating bubbles to limit staff movements at hospitals dealing with COVID-19 patients. It comes amid an investigation into how 3 nurses at Waitakere Hospital contracted the virus. 7 other cases are linked to this outbreak. The acting chief executive of the Waitemata District Health Board, Andrew Brandt, says the bubbles mean staff working on COVID-19 wards won't work in other areas on subsequent days.
I think it is in response to the clinical situation we have at the moment and in response to staffing concerns and concerns over the last week. So that's why we have moved to endeavour to do the bubble.
Andrew Brandt says about 400 staff have tested negative for COVID-19 during testing throughout the DHB. A bill to further support business and charities facing hardship due to COVID-19 has passed its first reading. The COVID-19 response bill includes changes to the Companies Act to help businesses facing insolvency place debt in hibernation until they can start trading normally again. It also changes the parental leave scheme to allow essential workers to return to work without losing leave and pay entitlements. Labour MP Chris Hipkins says the bill will also enable some charities to send and receive forms and take payments for lotteries online or by phone. The Epidemic Response Committee will report back on the bill by May 12th. National has laid out an $8 billion proposal to offer GST cash refunds to businesses hit hard by the COVID-19 lockdown. The opposition leader, Simon Bridges, says the government's loan scheme for small businesses is not good enough. He says National would allow firms to apply for a refund of any GST they'd paid during the last half of 2019, maxing out at $100,000. Companies would first have to prove their revenue had dropped by more than 50% across 2 successive months.
It's not right that small business should be left to carry so much of the economic suffering. These businesses have been forced to shut down in the national interest. It is in the national interest to keep them afloat.
Simon Bridges estimates about 160,000 businesses would be eligible. The Defence Force has signed a contractor to clear firing ranges in Afghanistan where civilians died. An investigation last year revealed 17 civilians were either killed or injured by unexploded ordnance left on firing ranges used by New Zealand troops in Bamiyan province. The Defence Force says it signed a contract with OMAR, an organisation for mine clearance and rehabilitation based in Afghanistan. It says the Afghan Directorate of Mine Action Coordination will oversee the work, which is expected to take up to 2 years. The contract is worth more than $6 million. It's 4.5 minutes past 6. In sport this evening, the Warriors are going back to basics when they resume training in small groups in Tamworth this week. After being in lockdown in New Zealand and unable to train as they normally would, Coach Stephen Kearney says the focus initially will be getting the players' skills back ahead of the NRL's resumption later this month. Players can only train in groups of 10, and there are limitations on physical contact for the first week.
6 weeks without, having a great deal of ball work. We'll start early with a focus on, the fundamentals, catching and passing, which, we often take for granted. So we'll try and, start there first and try and fast track that as quickly as possible.
Warriors coach Stephen Kearney and leading Australian sports manufacturer Kookaburra has developed a wax applicator to allow cricket balls to be shined without sweat or saliva. Concerns have been raised over using bodily fluids to polish the ball during the coronavirus pandemic. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, how are universities planning for the return of thousands of students? Suzanne Reba on her hugely popular Verified podcast about a group of women who sought justice from their attacker. Jess Barnes, who's transforming a neglected bowling green in Porirua into an urban vegetable garden. And Dr. Susie Wiles on the giant murder hornets found in the US. Keeping you company and up to date. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast through to midnight tomorrow Wednesday from Med Service for Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Showers, some heavy. Hail is possible, along with thunderstorms, clearing up in the morning. A period of strong and gusty southwesterlies tonight or overnight. Waitomo, Taumaranui, also Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Showers, some heavy with hail. Thunderstorms are possible about western areas. Showers clearing overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers at first, some heavy with hail, turning to rain with possible thunderstorms and hail overnight, then clearing later tomorrow morning or afternoon. Taranaki through to Wellington, including Waited Upper, rain or showers, possibly heavy and thundery with hail. That should clear up by tomorrow morning. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Showers, some heavy with hail, possible thunderstorms. Fining up tomorrow. Isolated evening showers, though, for Bulla. Westland and Northern Fiordland, mainly fine. Otago, Southland and Southern Fiordland. Showers gradually easing, becoming confined to the coast and Fiordland tomorrow. At the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with hail, becoming isolated tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 6.
And you're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The opposition is pitting its own financial rescue package against the government's, arguing National is better placed to rebuild the economy in the wake of COVID-19. The plan begins with a bold $8 billion cashback scheme for businesses, offering GST refunds of up to $100,000. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
As the clock ticks down to Budget Day next week, all eyes are on what the government has in store to keep people in jobs and businesses afloat. But the opposition doesn't want to wait and says the time to act is now.
So far, what we've seen is an excellent health response and a stalling on the economic side.
And the economic side is the hard bit, Simon Bridges says. It's simple to lock down, not so simple to stand up. The National leader today laid out his plan of action were he in charge, beginning with a cashback scheme for struggling businesses, an offer of 6 months GST refunded, maxing out at $100,000.
Even small businesses today are getting themselves in a position where they've got $40,000, $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 of debts accumulating because they've got zero income and their rates, their rent, their power, their other expenses are going up.
Companies would first have to prove their revenue had dropped by more than 50% across 2 successive months. National estimates some 160,000 businesses would be eligible at a total cost of $8 billion.
In distinction to what the government has done to date, it is both more generous for the businesses that need it, but it is also on the other side more targeted, and that means we're not wasting taxpayers' money.
The proposal stands in contrast to the government's loan scheme announced last week, which offers 12-month interest-free loans to small businesses. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says it complements the 12-week wage subsidy being doled out to 1.7 million workers, $585 a week each.
Certainly the feedback we've had is that it's helped keep those businesses afloat.
And the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is quick to stand by the government's record to date.
If you look back on the wage subsidy, that's been over $10 billion directly into the pockets of people who may have found themselves otherwise unemployed, and an extra $3 billion directly into our tax system to help with small businesses who are experiencing tough times right now.
But those tough times aren't about to let up soon, and Mr Bridges says the government should bring forward any extra support it has planned.
A week will make a difference. Every day that goes by is 1,000 more people on job seekers.
8 more days till the government reveals its COVID-19 budget. The countdown on for businesses and the opposition alike. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A bunch of us are hanging out for the social freedoms of Level 2, maybe a few drinks with buddies or even a previously outlawed party. Businessman Leo Malloy is one of them. He's planning a Level 2 party for 100 at his Auckland Viaduct Bar and Restaurant headquarters, and he has ambitiously locked in Friday, May 15 as the date. Just 4 days after Cabinet is due to decide if and when we'll drop down another alert level. Existing guidelines for Alert Level 2 allow inside gatherings of up to 100 people, as long as they maintain social distancing and keep a metre apart. Leo Malloy says he's already been in touch with the police to make sure it can all run smoothly, and he joins me now via Skype. Good evening, Leo. How do you reckon this is going to work?
I think it'll go swimmingly well. I can't see any possibility of any sort of disruption or impediment to what we're doing. We seem to be complying. We have the support of the police and the various other agencies that we require the support of to go ahead. I think it'll be splendid, actually. Are you inviting yourself along, Lisa? Because most other people have.
Well, are the people you've invited, do you reckon they're going to be well enough behaved? Getting people to stay 1 metre away from each other, realistically, they've had a few drinks. They'll be a bit stir-crazy after being locked up. The excitement might get to them. How are you going to keep them apart?
Look, it's not West Auckland and it's not Rangiora. So I think the sort of people that I fraternise and socialise with are normally quite well behaved. They're of an age where they perhaps have control over their hormones, so I'm not expecting too much of any inappropriate behaviour going on. If there is, I've got a cold bucket of water ready to act with urgency or send them home to their own bedrooms. So I don't anticipate any problems.
So are you going to have a dance floor?
Of course we do. That's what we do.
So, practicalities again, 1 metre apart, you know. The music moves them, they're thrashing around all over the place.
If they're in their bubble, who am I to judge? If they're in their bubble, they can do whatever they want to. They can dance together, they can cuddle, they can kiss if they're in their own bubble. So it depends who's in what bubble.
So, the people who are coming along to the party with someone from their bubble, fine, they can be close together, but you're mixing a variety of guests, aren't you? And those bubbles will not be able to cross-pollinate. They need to be a metre apart.
You're quite right, they won't, and that's why we're calling it a dummy run. It's an exercise to see how, under the Level 2 rules, how we might be able to operate in the hospitality industry. We have a significant number of people who are observing what we're doing, and we're all trying to learn from the experience. The good thing about these 100 people is we know them all, and most of them know each other, so one would imagine they'll listen to instructions or commands as required. So it's a learning curve for us, that is true, but we all have to learn how to re-emerge from this, don't we? And that's part of the exercise.
Are you going to have any special measures like security or just people keeping an eye on interactions?
We have a number of security, and we have 2.5 times the normal ratio of security that we do for a busy night. So, but for such a small number of people, we don't need a lot of security, but the security are wearing body cameras, and we have those thermo-imaging devices at the entrance too, so we can ascertain whether people do come with an issue, in which case they'll be turned away, obviously. But
yeah, what about staff? Will they wear masks or take any extra precautions?
Oh, you can't be serious. Would you honestly want to be served by someone wearing PPE? I mean, if you go and ask for a nice cocktail, do you want the bloke to be wearing an acrylic mask when he serves you?
So that's a no. That's a no then, Leo?
It's all arm's length stuff. And it's a simple rule under Level 2. It's arm's length. It's 1 metre. Put your arm out. If that person is closer than that, then you're breaching Level 2. It's that simple.
So who's been invited and who said yes, they'd love to come?
Well, about half the New Zealand media have offered to come now because they're all on the back of the story. They all want to piggyback on it. So They're all being politely declined, of course.
Besides them, who else?
Well, we have a small group of people that we socialise with. They've been invited. There's a lot of people who are very loyal to the HQ brand, the restaurant and the bar. They've all been invited.
Anyone nervous about coming, do you think?
Well, over 70 New Zealand First voters should definitely be nervous because they're a target market for COVID-19, aren't they?
But haven't you invited one guest at least who's over the age of 70? Are you comfortable with that?
He's a very fine example of the species, and I'll be checking him out thoroughly when he arrives to make sure he's in good working order.
Also, the police. So you have been in contact with the police about this. How have they reacted to your proposal?
They've been really great, actually. We were referred to Gary Davey, the area commander, in the first instance, and he's been fantastic. He referred us on. We had some dialogue with him, a couple of phone calls, his initiation. And then he referred us on to a gentleman, a senior sergeant, who's more involved in the alcohol-related side of activities, and he's been fantastic too. So I certainly couldn't possibly criticise the police. They've been very supportive, and they've had their input. They've given us some advice how they'd like to see things evolve. They've told us what their concerns are, more peripheral stuff, not so much what's happening at HQ, but what might be likely to happen outside of HQ.
Right, so what are the concerns they've raised generally?
Well, they're worried that people have been restless, and that when we drop down to level 2, if we sort of open the floodgates, if you like, that there may well be tribal behaviour. People might arrive en masse into the viaduct. They might, when they cannot get access to certain outlets that they wish to access, they might decide to behave. Well, how would you control them? I don't know what they'll do. I mean, a lot of them might be young. They might be fueled up before they arrive. You know, they were talking about mass arrest, if that matters. I was surprised they used that phrase, but that's what they said. They've got contingency plans if there is trouble for mass arrest.
So do you reckon, will they be there on the night? Have you invited any of them? Will they come in and check on the party?
Look, I told them they can come in whatever capacity they like. If they want to come in some sort of surveillance undercover capacity, they've declined that. They've said that, and I've told them that I want to have dialogue with them, so whether we have some sort of radio frequency arrangement, I don't know. But they have also told me that they will be represented on the night and on more than one occasion. So I took that to mean that they'll come in uniform and they'll probably just do what they do in a routine patrol, just pop in, say hi and bugger off again.
OK, so you've got your date set. What happens if the Prime Minister does not move us down to level 2 in time for the party?
If she's caught lying to the country again, then the natives are restless and they will riot. It's that simple.
Oh, that's a bit rough. What lie has she told? What are you saying?
Well, the incubation period for the virus is 5 days. We've now had 30 days without a case in the community. Every single reinfection has been like Waitemata Hospital, where it's come from within a ring-fenced infected community already. There has not been a community case for over 30 days. That's 6 incubation cycles. Ashley Bloomfield can argue as much as he likes that it's 14 days incubation. It's not. It's 5 days. 14 days is the extreme end of it. So if you've had 5 incubation cycles without a single infection, there is no reason for us to be on level 3, just like there's no reason not to come off level 3 at midnight next Monday. She took us down to level 3. Let me finish, please, Lisa. You asked a question. She took us down to level 3 from level 4 on the night of Anzac night, the Monday night at midnight. She said she wanted to get through Anzac weekend. She added 5 days on there. That means that the 2-week period for level 3 that she indicated expires on next Monday night at midnight. She's now extended it out after a cabinet meeting on Monday till Wednesday night. How much longer can she keep going on for?
So, Leo,
narcissistic behaviour has to stop.
You're really keen for level 2. If it doesn't happen, will you postpone your party?
Well, I can't flout the law. I can't be in contravention of the law. Clearly, that will be the justification for the police to arrive with their long batons and tasers out, and no one wants that. So that's the question. The obvious answer to that is yes, we will postpone.
Appreciate your time, Leo. Thanks so much for joining us. That is Leo Malloy, businessman who has headquarters, bar and restaurant down in the Viaduct, and he is planning for a party at level 2. It is 17 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Pests of the human variety have been caught on camera breaking lockdown rules on an island in Auckland's Hauraki Gulf. Cameras set up on pest-free Motukorea Browns Island in March after a stoat was spotted there haven't snapped the critter, but they have caught at least 6 people who shouldn't have been there. Our reporter Sarah Robson spoke to Auckland Councillor and Chair of the Environment Committee, Richard Hills.
During level 4 and level 3, our stoat detection cameras have detected at least 6 people walking on Motukorea Browns Island during that time. It may be more because our cameras don't cover the whole island. That's captured people there at 1:30 in the morning, a couple walking down the beach with a glass of wine in their hand, but they must be getting there by boat or kayak, travelling well over 1.5 kilometres from the coast at least. So it's kind of breaking the level 3 and 4 restrictions.
How disappointing is it to see something like that happening?
Everyone has been trying their best. I think Aucklanders have shown that everyone is playing to the rules and restrictions as much as they can, but to see something so blatant, to travel that far, potentially put themselves in danger, and the Coast Guard having to come out in the middle of the night to help people, it is pretty disappointing to see people travelling that distance to get to our Gulf Islands.
And obviously it's not just concerning from an emergency response perspective, it's also a concern about the conservation efforts that are going on as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. So if those people are disturbing our traps, and it's also the volunteers would love to be out there helping do work on the island, but they can't because of the level 3 restrictions. So to have people just kind of casually out there, potentially bringing other pests to the island, or also disturbing bird species or the traps that are set for the stoat, it is pretty disappointing.
And what do we know about the fate of these stoat?
The stoat is still on the loose. It's been quite tricky. It has killed some non-native species and has even hid some of those kills in our traps. So it's purposely evading traps and also using our traps as storage for its own food. So it's a pretty intelligent stoat by the sound of it, that likely has swum the distance from the coast as well. So it'll be a difficult one to catch, unfortunately.
And that was Auckland Councillor Richard Hill speaking to our reporter Sarah Robson. Christchurch police are investigating the poisoning of 2 family pets, which has left one dead and another lucky to be alive. The dogs, 2 Pomeranian poodle crosses named Bono and Clyde, belong to a family based in Custon, North Canterbury. The family, who we've chosen not to name, declined an interview, but posted online saying they believe the poisoning on Friday night was a deliberate act by a possibly disgruntled neighbour. The family alleges the situation unfolded after their dogs went off to chase rabbits and were found at the neighbour's home in a holding pen with their legs bound with twine. The family alleges the neighbour later left poisoned meat on their property, which both dogs ate. Clyde later passed away. They've filed 2 complaints with police, who are investigating. Ben Davidson, the managing director of Rangiora Vet Centre, which looked after the dogs, says they were poisoned by a prescription epilepsy drug called phenobarbital. He told Anand Zaki and cameraman Nathan McKinnon about the state of the dogs when they arrived at his clinic.
Very drowsy, a lot of nervous signs. So when we say nervous signs, like they can't control their legs, shaky, collapsing, can almost look like one of them almost looked like it had a broken leg, but it was just the fact that the nerves wasn't allowing it to stand up. So it can affect their mentation, make them behave in quite an odd way.
Is this a common poisoning for dogs?
Well, not so. When you talk about injuries, the clinical signs were more severe. So maybe that dog had a bit more of the toxic dose.
What are the common poisonings that you see?
We see lots of poisonings, but this is a wee bit unusual in that it's a prescription drug that was the cause of the poisoning, one that's normally used to treat epilepsy. It's unusual in that way, that it's not one of the more common toxicities that we would see.
What should people look for in situations like this?
So, as a pet owner, you know the normal behaviour of your pet. So when you see behaviours that you can't explain, where, and particularly nervous signs, drooling around the mouth, severe lethargy, where the animal loses all of its sort of energy or ability to stand, they can be quite typical signs of poisoning. So anything like that, you need to get on the phone and ring your vet clinic at any time of the day or night, just to talk through that. It's likely that you would need to get veterinary attention straight away for something like that.
This must be fairly shocking for you. Have you seen anything like this before?
So we treat the animal that's in front of us, and regardless of the circumstances of how that poisoning's occurred. So we focus on the animal and getting that animal through, and making sure that we do the very best for the animal. So we put all that other stuff aside, and we really do focus on the clinical signs in front of us and making sure that we can give that animal the best chance of pulling through.
And what did the test results show?
In terms of the testing, we were able to do the testing in-house, and fairly quickly we were able to diagnose what was going on, and then we go through that supportive care and that supportive treatment to try and reduce the effects of the toxicity.
And was there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think it has been a very up and down case. Very sad to lose a patient in any instance, but it's pretty heartwarming to know that we've got a dog out there that's making a reasonable recovery, and hopefully will eventually make a full recovery.
And that was Rangiora Vet Centre Managing Director Ben Davidson. He says he's yet to hear from the police about the case, but there is some good news. Mono, who survived the poisoning and is now back with his family, who posted online saying he's awake, eating and enjoying a good tummy rub. And we'll put Anand's interview, the video interview, up online if you want to have a look at it. There's been a few ruffled feathers on a couple of West Auckland Facebook pages over the past week. Owl feathers, that is, with a number of unconfirmed sightings of barn owls. Barn owls are widespread in Australia, and it's thought the New Zealand population came here from across the Tasman. Producer Jeremy Parkinson spoke with Green Bay resident Kathy McLean, who was alerted to a strange sound late on a Saturday evening.
We just heard a really loud noise of birds when we pricked out the back door and we heard it to see what was going on. And as I opened my back door, there was a really small little kingfisher type bird sitting on our back doorstep. And I thought, okay, that's really odd. Trying to look around to see what else was going on. I thought, he's flying into our window. He's a bit dazed. And then they eventually came right, and he went to fly away. And I thought it was very odd to be out at night time. And he flew back across our deck towards our back neighbour's property. And just as he was kind of about to land on their roof, something really big came and swooped in and grabbed him and was squawking and carrying on, and then it took off.
A few days later, while scrolling through Facebook, she saw mention of barn owls on the Birds of Auckland page.
So I was like, that sounds like pretty much what we said, and they said around the Tirarene golf course. So I posted my situation up on what had happened, and I said, maybe it was this barn owl.
Noel Hyde from the Rotorua-based Wingspan Bird of Prey Trust has been studying barn owls in New Zealand for a number of years.
The first sighting was on the west coast in 1946 and was reported the following year in the Ornithological Society Journal Notornis. There's been 13 sightings, reported sightings up until 2008, when a pair were found breeding in Kaitaia.
The success of that first verified breeding pair has seen the group of owls expand southward.
Yeah, so we've been monitoring those birds every year since then, and we look for further nests. We've now found 7 nests in the greater Kaitaia area. So the birds are expanding, and their official title is that they're now given, because they're breeding here in New Zealand, they're a native species and considered a coloniser.
And Kathy McLean's unconfirmed sighting in West Auckland the other week isn't the most recent.
Yeah, they are moving south, and we've had reports from East Cape, Bay of Plenty, and of course one was just seen last week, I think it was, in Palmerston North.
Noel Hyde says while sightings are rare, the barn owl is now widespread in New Zealand.
They've been spotted as far south as Christchurch. We've had scattered reports from all over the country. As far as breeding birds go, hasn't been confirmed, but we've got them, we think, breeding in Pocono, just south of Auckland. 3 birds were seen together in the Hanua Ranges about 5 years ago, and I would suggest that if there were 3 birds seen together, there's a good chance that they were breeding.
As for the number of barn owls in New Zealand, Noel Hyde says he isn't sure how many there might be.
Nobody knows, because they're so widely scattered and nowhere common. Even in Northland they're not common, but they're establishing themselves. Sightings are going to become more prevalent as the birds do colonise. I would suspect there could well be 200-odd birds in the country at the moment, possibly more.
He says the barn owl is a prolific breeder, but isn't a threat to native species like the moorpork, as their habitat doesn't include dense bush.
their populations are dependent on food resources, and they are basically a boom and bust species. So when rodent populations peak, then barn owls can breed incredibly readily, and as long as the food is there, they will breed. They will just continue breeding.
For Checkpoint, I'm Jeremy Parkinson.
They're kind of creepy sounding, don't you reckon? A lot of you getting in touch about our interview with Leo Malloy. He is the Auckland bar and restaurant owner. Headquarters is his business, and he's planning a level 2 party with 100 people there, a test case, he says, for socialising under level 2. Maureen says, Leo Malloy is an irresponsible, brash, money-hungry man. Why does he think he knows more about lockdowns and levels than the experts who are trying to avoid people getting sick or dying? Joe says, Leo Malloy had me listening until he started to profess to know more about COVID-19 than Ashley Bloomfield came across as a drongo after that. Thanks, Joe. Stephanie says, one has to admire a barman who knows more about infection periods than public health experts. Rita, though, says, good on Leo. I'm over 70 and sick of being treated like a child who can't take care of herself. Another one says, Leo's so offensive. How could anyone be so brazen and disrespectful to New Zealanders? Tony wants me to point out that Leo Malloy has his incubation period's wrong. It's not 5 days, says Tony. It's anywhere from 2 to 11 days. That's why 14 days is a sensible caution period. Thank you. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. School principals say the Education Ministry needs to tell them urgently how many children will be allowed in classrooms under Alert Level 2. The COVID-19 response bill, which would amend laws to help struggling businesses, essential workers and charities, has passed its first reading. The Defence Force has contracted a local company to clear firing ranges in Afghanistan, where civilians died from abandoned ordnance. And no new COVID-19 infections have been reported for a second day, and the total number of confirmed and probable cases is now 1,486. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the Spanish world of coronavirus. It's not pretty. Vicky Ho on curating films for a film festival without picture theatres. Are our small screens going to do them justice? And how many picture theatres will be open once you're on the other side of the pandemic?